This thing's on. And we're talking about Indiana, Illinois. This is Inside Indiana Overtime. Alex McCarthy finally showed up. This is Zach Osterman. We kicked Dustin out, even though he's much more hardworking than Alex.
And better looking.
Well, he's a lot of things better than Alex, really. 80-64, Indiana gets, revenge, if you want to call it that. Certainly gets to move on to the Big Ten semis for the first time in 7 years. And really, I guess I heard in a radio spot I did a couple minutes ago that there were some claims that this might have been Indiana's best defensive performance, at least in the first half of the year. And I think when you consider 7 of 27 from the field, these are Illinois' numbers, 21 points, and it took them, I think, about 14 and a half minutes to get to 10.
Yeah.
They broke all the way to 12 when Brandon Paul hit a 3. 1 of 6 Illinois was from behind the arc, and Indiana just owned them in the rebounding column, really all night, or all afternoon, I guess I should say. This was a very, very, very good defensive performance from Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
Forced Illinois' backcourt into 9 of 38 shooting, and Tracy Abrams took the most shots out of anybody in Illinois' backcourt. And if you do those things, when you make that group inefficient, DJ Richardson and Brandon Paul in particular, 4 of 23, the two of them combined, and when you're forcing someone like Tracy Abrams to be the centerpiece in a backcourt that's got Richardson and Paul, you're doing a good job.
Yeah, and especially when you hold it against and obviously it was in Champaign, but when you look at their only meeting this year and compare it with this, you can just really see the tangible differences in the way they played Richardson and Paul. They combined for over 40 points again on February 7th when they beat Indiana, including, they were just on fire for the last 5 or 10 minutes of that game.
Mm-hmm.
And then tonight, like you said, 4 for 23 is like 17% or something like that. And they were not anywhere near as dangerous as they were before. And it seemed for a couple minutes in that second half, it seemed like they were kind of, as a team, Illinois was kind of starting to mount a comeback, and it was, it got within 8. They kept kind of trading baskets for a while, and then they got to stop and got within 10, and it looked like, this might be. It looked a little bit familiar. A game where they really dominated for 30 minutes.
They got it down to 8 at the under 8 timeout. It was 60-52. And that was right when you felt like Illinois had kept the deficit close. They kept it to 10-12. And all of a sudden, Indiana had a couple empty possessions. Illinois hit a couple big shots. And you felt like the Illini were surging. And I think I even said on Twitter this was right about the time Indiana started letting go in Champaign, because they were up 10 with 4:21 left in that game, and they were in control for a lot of the second half, but couldn't put it away. From that point, Indiana outscores Illinois 20-12, gets to the free throw line. And what Don Crean said was, that basically they stopped really kind of focusing on rebounding the ball the way they needed to, Indiana. And coming out of that timeout, they started doing it again. And as soon as they did that, the way that they were defending Illinois' guards, we're not really sure.
Yeah,
right now.
They're testing
the way that they were defending Illinois' guards, if they weren't giving them extra looks, and they weren't giving them cheap, easy looks, which they weren't, when they were playing well anyway, there was just no way Illinois was going to make this one close.
Yeah, they couldn't, after that point, they just couldn't trade baskets anymore. They really neutralized their shooters, and Jordan Hull said after the game that and he was on Richardson for some periods of time during the game,
and very good job.
He did. On a guy who is as skilled a scorer as DJ Richardson is.
As heck, but
yeah.
Illinois. But yeah, he scored 23 points. He scored 8 in the final 2 minutes against Indiana in Champaign. So
they had the game tying shot last night too. He's been used to that.
But I was talking to somebody after the game about Victor Oladipo, and I think this is particularly applicable to him. But I think it's also applicable to Indiana defensively when they play well. I said Oladipo plays NBA defense, which is to say that he understands that it's not just about stopping a guy from shooting or stopping him from getting the ball. Sometimes that's not the aim. The aim is just to make him inefficient, and the aim is to make him tired and frustrated. And you would say that that's what they did with with Trey Burke both times they played him. You would say that's probably what they did a little bit with Keith Appling, although he struggled beyond just that. Yeah. And that's what they did with Richardson and Paul today. I mean, Richardson was visibly frustrated the whole second half with the officiating. He felt like he wasn't getting any space. He felt like the officials weren't basically giving him any kind of respect zone, comfort zone with which to operate. I don't know if it was 23 combined. Paul is 2 of 13. He scored 11 of his 16 points from the free throw line. So he eventually did get some of those calls he wanted. But you know, it's almost this ability to not just defend a guy, but wear him out. And I think Oladipo is far and away the best player on the court at that. And I think I asked Sheehy about it post game, and he said that that's always really kind of their aim, because Sheehy and Oladipo spend a lot of time guarding usually the other team's best player, assuming he's not a big man. But that's also something that when Indiana has played well defensively this year, I think we've seen them do as a team, is not just stop you from scoring, not just kind of put its foot on your neck and press down, but just to wear a team out. And so when they get to that, again, if they're playing well and if they're focused and locked in and whatever other cliche Tom Crean wants to use, when they do get to that under 8 timeout, they're up 8 points and the opponent is surging, but really the opponent is kind of on its last legs, and Indiana can just push them over the edge. And that's what you felt like with Illinois. I mean, by the end of the game, Indiana was trying to play time and score, but they were getting easy buckets.
Yeah.
And you just looked like Illinois had just hit a wall and totally run out of energy.
Yeah, and I mean they were, with Indiana pressing for parts of that second half too. That also just really was kind of one of the last straws there of just, both mental and physical, just frustration with from Illinois. And we actually saw that with Michigan a little bit too. Victor Oladipo just quickly after that game, almost hinted a little bit at the that when Burke missed that last free throw that that was the front end of a 1-on-1. Oladipo hinted that maybe that was because he had tired legs or something like that. Where it's coming,
maybe harder too.
It's and where it's not. It's not just It's not just Richardson and Paul. It's like you said, it's something that they're really, really good at, especially Oladipo and Sheehy, and even Yogi Ferrell has been really good on a lot of teams' point guards. We saw him shut down Appling a couple times, but that's just something where they are able to kind of take advantage of that late in games and get some of those transition buckets that really, in terms of score and in terms of just kind of mental degradation a little bit, just kind of helped to put teams away, and we saw that definitely tonight. I mean, it went from a game that you're thinking, this might be a nail biter, to someone, I think maybe the ESPN headline or something called it a blowout. I mean, it just went from...
They cruised at the end. They were able to cruise.
Yeah, I mean, they just really dramatically pulled away.
Another big game from Cody Zeller. I think he had 14 in the first half and 6. He came out and scored 10 and pulled in 3 rebounds in the second half, so he finished 24-9. That's 49 points, 19 rebounds in his last 2 games. And, at the risk of calling 2 games a trend, we are starting to see maybe the Cody Zeller that we wanted to see all season. And I'm not sure that's a realistic sort of game-in, game-out thing. I'm not sure Indiana can expect to get that from him the rest of this weekend and then through the whole NCAA tournament. But, again, we see sort of this re-emphasis of going back to Zeller, the way that Indiana really did after the Illinois game when they went to Ohio State, and it was immediately straight to Zeller and then straight at whoever was guarding him. And this time I don't think it was, after the Ohio State loss in particular, and Minnesota kind of tacked onto that, I don't think it was so much that Indiana wasn't going to Zeller. I think that maybe that was a little bit more of a Zeller-specific thing to say, to just kind of get himself to a place mentally where he brings that sort of unstoppable attitude and mentality. And if he hadn't been, I'm not trying to rip on the guy, but he had 4 turnovers. He was sloppy with the ball at times. Honestly, he probably could have had 30 tonight. There were some moments where he missed in close or where he turned the ball over in close. As well as he played, he could have scored even more than he did. And I wonder if there's an element of that we're seeing that is just kind of Zeller getting to the postseason and maybe just turning it on a little bit. So something came on in that Michigan game to where he just kind of finally said, no more, I'm not going to let the physical play affect me. I'm not going to let it take me out of the game. It's a good segue because that's part of what Wisconsin's going to try and do tomorrow afternoon. Games at, 1:40 Eastern, 12:40 Central.
Yeah.
And that's what Wisconsin's going to try and do. That's what they've always tried to do. He scored a lot. I think he scored, 23 at home against Wisconsin or 21 maybe.
Yeah, he had a really big first half.
But he had a really big first half.
Yeah.
And then the second half, they basically just closed him down.
Yeah.
And he struggled against Wisconsin, I believe, up in Wisconsin. And really, even when he scored against Wisconsin, because if memory serves, he had 17 in the Big Ten tournament, lost last year in the quarterfinals to the Badgers. Even when he scores, it doesn't feel like he's a presence so much. I think that Wisconsin does a good job of limiting just his physical presence. And so sometimes he can get a little bit of an offensive rhythm, but he's not rebounding the ball as well. He's not defending as well. And I think that is what they need from him tomorrow against Wisconsin, because again, one of the sort of ways that no one ever talks about in terms of controlling tempo is rebounding the ball. If you're rebounding the ball and you're not handing extra possessions and extra looks back to another team, then you are not letting them sort of set the tempo of the game. You are going to get a chance to reset the tempo every single time you bring it down the floor. Obviously, Indiana has struggled to turn Wisconsin over under Tom Crean, but other teams have not this year, so it's not necessarily something that can't be done. They were incredibly sloppy with the ball at Michigan State just like a week ago, a week and a half ago, basically. So it can be done. And then the other thing I think you really need from Zeller and from Christian Watford is just the ability to not, I don't want to say not get pushed around, but I think there is an element of that. You can't let Wisconsin sort of set the agenda down low, and if you don't do that, if you sort of take that space the way that Indiana did today against admittedly a much weaker Illinois front court than Wisconsin will bring, then you just set sort of a foundation that Indiana has done a really good job of building upon in some of their big wins this year.
Yeah, and I mean since that Minnesota game where it was just such an obvious kind of mismatch at times inside. They've looked to make a conscious effort to really kind of start going at guys inside and kind of almost at times embrace that physicality that kind of the scouting report has turned into, where if you force Indiana into something physical, then maybe they don't play as well. I mean, we've seen teams try and do that, and we've seen IU kind of accept the challenge, especially in the Michigan game, especially tonight, or today. And then tomorrow, I mean, Wisconsin kind of proved today in the second half that they could, because Jared Bergeron got into a little bit of foul trouble and he had to come out for some big portions of time in the second half, and they still were able to really play really well in the paint against a Michigan team that didn't play much of Jordan Morgan tonight and is not a great inside team, but still the fact that Wisconsin was able to play so well inside and score, I think, 18 points in the paint playing without Jared Bergeron in times is just kind of another dimension of their game where you just kind of have to try and figure it out and figure out how you can match up against them.
I mean, Bo Ryan teams are always tough because that offense creates looks in the paint. It just does. It creates looks in the paint, or it creates threes, off of looks in the paint. It forces you to defend for 30 or 35 seconds. There's not a lot of mystery about what Wisconsin does. What's interesting, and we'll kind of wrap it up here, but Wisconsin scores 17 points in the first half, 51 in the second, so they can score in bunches. I mean, they are not untalented at really pouring it on a team. Indiana's they're going to have to figure out a way to speed Wisconsin up to Wisconsin's detriment, which is to say that they've still got to defend well. I think they've got to get into Wisconsin's guards and try to turn them over. And then Indiana is always best this year when it works its way inside out. I don't think 5 of 17 from behind the three-point line. I think you'd expect something better than that from Indiana tomorrow. Still 40 points in the paint. I think you have to expect a lower number than that tomorrow, so those two things maybe even each other out. It's just going to be, again, without being too cliche, it's just going to be another physical game, another tough test for Indiana. Can they handle it? Can they beat the one team in the Big Ten that they haven't beaten? And probably if they haven't already, can they seal up the number 1 seed in Indianapolis? Because I think a win tomorrow probably does that.
Mm-hmm.
So we will be back here then. In the meantime, we're going to be finishing up soon enough here and heading on out. For Alex McCarthy, I'm Zach Osterman. Stay tuned to InsideIndiana.com. We're going to have a ton of stuff the next few days. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you very soon.